All right, guys, let's pick up where we left off with Unit 2. Thomas Malthus thought we were going to run out of food. There were too many people. There wasn't enough food. That's a problem. He believes it's a problem because he does some basic math. Human populations expand, well, in a unique way. Think about it. If a person has 5 kids, and then each of those 5 kids has 5 kids, and then each of those 5 kids has 5 more kids, well, that's a lot. Food doesn't work like that, right? You plant one potato, you get one potato. And he thought this was a just fundamental flaw. We were not going to be able eventually to produce enough food. He suspected we were, during his time, going to run out of food. He thought that the Irish across the away from England, that they would starve. The logic is pretty simple, right? And ultimately, he's a determinist, right? He's an environmental determinist. He thinks the physical environment will dictate for us how our culture works and how much food we can ultimately get out of the land. He ultimately thinks we should allow this to happen, right? We should let people starve because we're just delaying the inevitable. If we keep trying to help, or if the English keep trying to help, say the Irish in his example, they'll just get larger and larger and larger, and then ultimately we'll all face calamity, he argued. Now, of course, Malthus was wrong. We know that. Why? What did he miss? Take a second and think about it. Maybe pause the video. Maybe answer the question out loud or write it down. What did he miss? Why was he wrong? He was wrong because he didn't think about technology. He didn't account for the fact that humans had the ability to be inventive. We could come up with new ways to produce more food. And in fact, that's exactly what we did with the Industrial Revolution. We came up with new ways to produce fertilizers that would make the ground produce more food per acre. We came up with ways to turn land that was previously not going to produce food, it wasn't arable, this fertilizer would turn it into arable land. And we would also come up with ways to more rapidly harvest food and, maybe most importantly, more rapidly transport food. So he missed that, okay? People like Esther Bostrup, we would think of her as a possibilist, right? They believe that we shape the physical environment, that we're the most important agents of change, not the physical environment. She pointed out that humans always do this. We are always inventive. And if there's a problem that we're facing, we can always solve it. For example, we solved the problem that Malthus pointed out with tractors, with mechanical harvesters, with chemical fertilizers. Another thing she points out is that fertility rates began to decrease. Right? This was not something Malthus considered. He didn't think that would happen. Right? Fertility rates decreased for a lot of reasons back then. One was it began to become difficult to have large families as more and more people moved to cities. And remember something we talked about in a lot of our units, people started to move into cities after the Industrial Revolution because that's where the jobs were. Why did they have to stop farming? It was because they weren't needed anymore, right? This new farming equipment made it so that a typical farm that would take 10 people to harvest now took one person with one machine. Those 9 people can now go do something else. And it turns out they were needed in the cities. They were needed in the factories that were being built, producing things like agricultural equipment, right? That led naturally to families being smaller because on a farm, having a large family is helpful. They can work the farm. In a city, it's very challenging. Now you've got to take care of those kids all day. You got to keep them cramped up in a small apartment. That's not going to work, right? So she points these things out. Today, Malthus and Bostrup obviously aren't with us anymore, but neo-Malthusians still are. These are people who still think Malthus was onto something. People like Paul Ehrlich, right? He wrote The Population Bomb. They argue it's not so much that Malthus was wrong, it's that he was kind of thinking about the issue in a different way. It's not that we're necessarily going to run out of food for the amount of people we have. It's that with as many people as we have on our planet, if one thing goes wrong, it's all going to fall apart. In other words, if a population bomb is dropped, we're going to have global starvation and famine. This book was written during the Cold War, of course, and people were worried about nuclear exchange. Today, people are worried about global warming, about climate change. Droughts are becoming less predictable. Weather patterns are becoming less predictable. Might it be that one year multiple regional droughts hit at the same time? Regional droughts are common. What if they all hit at the same time? What would happen? would we be able to feed the world? They argue, no, we would not be able to feed the world. It's your call. I mean, if you think they're right, cool, great. Maybe you come up with a solution. If you think they're wrong, okay, great. That's wonderful. Rest easy. You should be able to, as an AP Human student, think about all these perspectives and give them, a sort of positive, critique, or give them a negative critique. Challenge them. Remember the AP style question that explain the limitations of. You're going to see one of those. You may see an explain the strengths of question. They might ask you to think about a weakness of, a limitation of Malthusian theory. Okay, well, can you do that? They may ask you to think about a strength of the neo-Malthusians theory. Can you do that? I bet you can. Let's move on to the next topic. Let's talk about migration. The easiest way to think about migration is through Ravenstein's laws. Ravenstein points out that there are a couple of different patterns that migrants follow. One is distance decay. This is the idea that the further away a place is, the less likely a migrant's going to go there. You can flip that. In other words, migrants tend to move short distances. He also points out the gravity model. Migrants are going to be pulled to large urban areas. That's where the jobs are. That's where the money is. Step migration is another common pattern that he notes, meaning migrants are going to take multiple steps on the way to their eventual stopping point. It's rare that a migrant, globally at least, picks a place to move and just moves there, right? They have to take smaller steps. He also points out that rural to urban migration is most common. This is obvious. Again, people are pulled from more impoverished areas to wealthier areas. Rural areas tend to be poorer. Urban areas tend to be wealthier. He also points out that counter-migration occurs, meaning as one group of people move in, another group is probably moving out. And then there may be return migration too. So it may be kind of cyclical. Some people may ultimately return to where they were originally from. He points out that youth is common. Most migrants are young. They're working age, right? He also points out some gender patterns. Most people that move interregionally are men, and most people who move internally or domestically within one country, they're female, okay? Maybe be able to think about why this is, right? International migrants tend to be men because the kinds of countries that are generating lots of migration tend to be countries where men get education or more education and training than women do. And so they're going to have skills that are more in demand internationally. Women in these countries probably don't have as much access to education. They may not have the same job skills, and they may not be able to be very competitive on the international job market because their skills are mostly domestic, okay? I want to move on and say a few more things about migration. You're going to need to be able to think about push factors, pull factors, right? Remember, migrants that move voluntarily usually move for jobs, right? It's economic. They want higher pay or they want a job. But there are more, right? There are all sorts of other pull factors making people want to come to a place, and they're listed here. On the flip side, you can also have push factors. So the lack of job opportunities or the lack of high-paying jobs, that would be a push factor. That would make someone want to leave a place and migrate to another place, okay? Again, only voluntary migrants are going to experience push or pull factors. Some migrants are going to be forced to move, okay? Those migrants that choose to move, they're going to face obstacles that may make it harder for them to move. They're also going to encounter opportunities that may make it easier for them to move. You should be able to think about the kinds of things that migrants might encounter along their migration journey. It's common sense. Let's talk about forced migration for a little bit. Some forced migrants are forced to move and they stay in their home country. Maybe they're fleeing violence, but they don't leave the country. They just move to another area. Some migrants are refugees. Right? They're forced to move through violence and they choose to leave their home country. When they do that, they become refugees. When they do that and they formally request protection of the new country that they've entered, they become asylum seekers. Okay, you should be able to use those terms confidently. Other terms that you should be able to use: chain migration. Chain migration is the idea that, say, a person moves into the U.S. in the 1960s from China, and they do well. They start a business. They're successful. They make money. They may contact their family members back home, even their extended family, maybe cousins, aunts, uncles, and tell them, hey, things are going well over here. If you come over, you can work for me and you can make a good living. It's good here. Well, what are those people probably going to do? They're probably going to come, right? They're going to come over. As this happens, as chain migration occurs, ethnic enclaves can develop. These are places where particular ethnic groups, minority ethnic groups, cluster, right? They create demographically homogeneous clusters. Are there benefits to that for the migrants? What are they? Are there negatives? Are there challenges that these migrants might face because of this? Pause it if you need to. Answer out loud. Force yourself to sort of prove that you know the answer to these questions. Benefits are it makes a soft landing spot. It makes it so that the migrant is going to not have culture shock. They're going to encounter people who are like them, who share their language, maybe share their food preferences, their ways of dress, their music preferences. What's a negative? Well, when you move into an ethnic enclave, you're not going to be exposed to the larger outside world, right, from the majority culture. You may not fit in very well. You may feel left out. You may not be able to participate in the larger economy very well. You may not be able to participate in the larger political culture very well because you're kind of isolated in this ethnic enclave. In other words, it might make it difficult for you to become part of this new country that you've arrived in, right? Let's keep pushing ahead here, guys, with other terms that are important to be able to use. Xenophobia, the fear of others. Quotas is when countries set a number limit for how many people can come into their country. And migration anywhere is difficult, right? In the U.S., it takes a lot of money and it takes a lot of time to legally enter. This is true of most countries. And this is also why illegal immigration is so common. It's just easier and it's quicker. If you need to move because you're looking for a better job, you're trying to pay for things that your family needs, it's going to take you 5 years and thousands of dollars that you probably don't have. Illegal immigration is now going to look like an attractive, albeit illegal, option. Make sure you can use terms and you recognize terms like internal migrants, people move within one country, interregional versus intra-regional migrants, migrants that are moving between different regions or within a region. It's important, and those terms can be kind of confusing. Make sure you can think about cyclic migrants. This comes up again in Unit 5, right? These are pastoral nomads. These are people who move based on the weather. They are taking their animals to pasture, and as it gets colder, they move to lower elevations. As it becomes warm again, they move to higher elevations, and they graze their animals. We also call this type of movement transhumance. It's when people move with their animals, right, so they can eat. Okay, guys, to sort of finish us off for the day, be able to think very broadly about migration. There are lots of positives, there are lots of negatives, lots of challenges. The positives, the good things that come out of it for the migrants and for the countries that receive them, and for the countries that lose them. In some cases, crowded countries generate a lot of migrants. Okay, so say that you live in India. It's crowded. You're looking for a new place to move. You move. That's a win for India in a way because it could relieve overcrowding. Think about the fact that smart, new workers are coming into your economy. So when the U.S. gets a new person from some other country, they bring all their skills and knowledge with them. That's good for us. Remittances are another good thing about migration. Poorer countries like Tajikistan get a significant portion of their GDP from remittances, from money sent home from other countries. Right? So many Tajikis go work in Russia. When they work there, they earn money and they send it back to Tajikistan. Lots of challenges too, right? Migration can create conflicts between native-born people and migrants. They might not integrate culturally very well. They may not speak the language. They may not share the religious beliefs. They may prefer to live in a different way. It might not click, right? It might not work. Sometimes remittances aren't a good thing. Right? If you think about it from the flip side, they are taking money out of the home country's economy. So those Tajikis that are sending that Russian money back to Tajikistan, that hurts Russia's economy. It's not great for Russia. And the ultimate negative, maybe, it takes working age people out of their home country. When that Indian fellow leaves his country, that's one less person India has to work. That could harm the economy, ultimately. Okay, guys, we came in just at 15 minutes today. Nailed it. I hope you learned something. I hope you already knew all this stuff, right? And this was truly just review. Keep yourself honest, right? Please make sure you're asking yourself questions. You're going back through the printed notes that you have and answering those printed questions that we have. Make sure you're trying to extend your thinking. maybe even try to connect it to other topics and other ideas from our course. Okay. That dynamic sort of thinking is going to help you, especially on the FRQ. Okay. Keep working hard. I'll begin Unit 3 tomorrow.